time to explain the entire situation as simply as possible. All right, so there are about 70 million shares of GME that's supposed to exist, okay? And of that, 50 is publicly traded. 50 million, okay? So we have, let's just for simplicity's sake, let's go with, we have, these are shares of GME. There's 5 that are publicly traded and another 2 that are owned by the investors, okay? But if you look at the entire ownership of the stock, there are, if you add up all the owners of the stock, there are 100 million, which doesn't add up, right? Like, how, if they've only issued 70 million, how do people own 100 million shares? That's because of the synthetic shares from the naked shorts. So there are about 30 million worth of synthetic shares, okay? So this happens when, like, if some guy decides to short the stock. Normally you have to borrow a share from the market, from the pink, which is the shares in the open market. You have to borrow it and then sell it to someone, right? But if you do, if a fund decides to sell the share without borrowing it first, then they just sold someone a share that doesn't exist. That means this guy right here, this share is sitting in someone's account and it was sold short, but it doesn't exist. So that means it's a synthetic share that the market makers will have to deliver on eventually. So eventually they're going to have to go into the marketplace, find a share, and deliver on it, right? So if we have these 10 shares, and then we have, so in the open market that are actually tradable, you have your 50 million, and then also being traded on the market is your 30 million more of synthetic shares that don't exist that the market makers have to come up with, right? So if they want to close a short, they want to come back and close that position. Eventually, they are going to have to provide the people who they sold these fake shares to with real shares, right? So if they want to close a short, if they want to close one of these synthetic shares, they have to go to the market, buy one of these, and then give it back to the person who owns this one, which will essentially eliminate the existence of that synthetic share because they have provided that person with the real share. So now, once that synthetic share is removed from the marketplace, now instead of there being 8 shares in the market, there are only 7, right? So what the market makers have to do right now is they have to get rid of the synthetic shares. When they want to, not only do they have to close the shorts, but they have to go and provide the shares to people who they've promised the shares, but they don't have the shares because they've short sold, essentially just inventing their shares out of thin air, right? And so the situation we have is they have to somehow use these 50 million shares that are real in order to close the position of these synthetic shares, right? So now that they've closed one, now there only exists 7 shares for them for them that are trading in the market, right? So every time they close a synthetic share, they go out, they buy another one of these shares, they give it back to the person who owns the synthetic share, and now this synthetic share no longer exists, right? So that's how this works. But currently we're in a situation where the market makers don't have the shares, okay? The market makers have to cover these 30 million synthetic shares, but let's say this amount of them are held by us. Okay, this amount of the float is held by us. We as retail, so 40 million shares. Imagine if WSB has 8 million members currently. If half of them own stock in GME, and they're each good timing, each 10 shares, or sorry, if half of the WSB owns stock in GME, and they each have 10 shares, that means and they refuse to sell. That means all of this stock, this 40 million, is no longer the free market. Okay, so they are no longer able to buy these 4 shares to come close their synthetic shorts, right? So if they want to close one of these synthetic shorts, they have to go to the market, buy this share, give it back to this guy, and now the synthetic short is closed, right? But if they want to close the next one, they have to go back and buy the same fucking share, right? because these four shares over here are not being moved. We as retail is not moving them, right? So now we have a situation where, okay, now they have to go back and buy the same share again, which creates demand for this specific share over and over and over again, which is what increases the price. Okay, so imagine this, but each of these three is actually 30 million shares. Okay, so they have to come up with 30 million shares, assuming that we have this amount tied up. Okay, this amount tied up. And so now we have to look at it like this. We don't actually know how much of this stock, this 40, is owned by retail. The theory is that we actually own more than the amount that that is real shares. So if every member of WSB owns 10 shares, then we own more than exist in the float. So let's assume that number is 60 million, right? If we own 60 million shares, they can no longer close the synthetic shorts unless they buy at a price that we are willing to sell to them, right? So because all the shares that they are moving around, all the shares that they're moving to short squeeze, to dump on us, all of those shares are literally just what we are willing to sell to them. And so that is why they're so desperate to sell us shares. The price right now is irrelevant. Everything that the market makers are currently doing is to get shares off our plate. And so now you guys are thinking, oh, dude, oh, the volume was so high today. Like they must have, everyone, all these retail must have sold out. Like it's got to be over. All right, let's look at some data. This is the data from Fidelity today from customers of Fidelity. Okay, so these are retail traders. Look at the buy sell ratio 115,000 buys and 40,000 sells. We are still buying more than we're selling. Okay, retail is still buying more than they're selling. And so the idea that oh all retail is dumping off, that's not the case. Okay, people saw this dip and people thought no, I'm not going to sell, I'm going to average down. Okay, people are not getting out of this. We are still buying more than we're selling. And so we come back to this. Okay, if we own enough of the float, like the theoretical float, which is 80 million, which is 50 million of real shares and 30 million of synthetic shares, that means that they are going to have to come to us to get our real shares to close their synthetic shorts. And that means that we set the price. Unless, so whatever we're willing to sell to them at is what they will get it for. Okay, so all we have to do is hold. If they dump the price as low as possible and people start selling, that means they get to get these shares that they want from us. They get to get these real shares that they want for us for cheap, right? But if we sit there and we let them dump the price on us and we don't sell, which as you can see from the data, that retail data, which is from today, we are not selling. That means they cannot get the shares to close to close these synthetic positions and to close the shorts. Okay, assuming that even if the short positions are half as much, right? So now let's look at the situation in which they are closing these shares, right? So there's three of these and there's five of these, and we own 40 million that we've boxed off. Okay, every time they want to close a synthetic short, they have to go buy this one share, close it, which means they get rid of this, which reduces the theoretical float that exists out there, which means now that they have to, now there's literally just less shares trading, which increases volatility, but also allows us to set the price. So now they have to come and with less shares trading and come back and buy this one again and literally increase the demand. So they know that there's two ways to get these shares out of us. Okay, either they can dump the price as low as possible and try to get people to panic sell, and after which everyone who's planning to panic sell has already done so. They have to come and pump the price and pay us what we are willing to sell for to get these shares off our hands. Okay, and so every single next short that they close, every single next position that they close becomes more and more difficult because there's less and less shares out there, and so it's literally exponentially increasing the difficulty of closing these positions. Okay, so these shorts, if the first half were closed relatively easily based on people who were dumping shares based on their initial like dump offs, which honestly, like if you look at the volume, people weren't selling. So they are literally trying every single tactic in the book to get us to sell. But as long as we do not sell, we control the demand. And at the end of the day, we don't know if we control not only the entire float, but the synthetic shares. If that is the case, that is why they're so desperate for us to sell. That is why every single piece of news you see out there is trying to get you to sell. Why else would they need you to sell? If you look at it logically, right? If you are a hedge fund and you are trying to finesse money out of a retail investor, isn't it just easy? And all these retail investors are in this one random stock. It's so easy for them to just pump the shit out of it and then sell all their shares at the top and then leave us holding the bag. They could easily do that. But why have they not done so? It's because they need our shares. The shares do not exist, okay? And so here's the thing. When you have a situation in which the synthetic shares exist, and the broker does not provide the person who has a synthetic share with the real share within 21 days. That is called a fail to deliver. Okay, and this fail to deliver, FTD, fail to deliver, is a statistic that is published by the SEC. Okay, and there's ways that the funds can get around this to like kind of like push the ball down the road and not really publish when they don't deliver on a share. But on average, for a given stock with like the same amount of shares uh, as GameStop, let's say Lowe's for example, right? Lowe's tends to have a fail to deliver number of like 50,000 shares. Okay, GameStop had a fail to deliver of 5 million shares. They had that many shares that they could not come up with in time, which means they are unable to locate shares. They cannot come up with real shares to give people when the situation where there's fake. And this is data from before. This is data from before January 15th. This is the lagging data. So they cannot come up with shares. And the more that we buy and the more that we hold, the more fucking screwed they are because they cannot come up with our shares. Okay, we have the shares. And as you can see from this data, retail buyers are still buying more than they're selling. They looked at this drop and they thought, we have cheap shares. They are not bailing, okay? Do not assume that just because the volume went up today that people were bailing out. This was a lot of manipulation and people getting in, okay?